300 registrations globally. We know there are attrition, but still it's a good sign of interest. So before I introduce our chair, let me say a few words about the logistics of this webinar. Please keep your microphones on mute to prevent any background noise. There will be a Q&A session after the presentations. You may type in questions while the speakers are speaking. They will either be directly addressed in the chat when speakers finish their presentations. Otherwise, our team will collect your questions from the chat box and pass them on to me during the Q&A section. Feel free to contact Sunil through personal chats if you have any concerns or technical issues. And if you are not able to stay throughout today's webinar or feel you want to explore our other 104 previous webinars, they're available on the World Bank's OLC and YouTube channels, and you can find the link in the chat box. Now, let me introduce our chair for today. We have the pleasure to welcome Shobha Shetty, the World Bank Global Director for the Agriculture and Food Global Practice, and who is going to say a few opening words. Shobha, over to you.
Thanks very much, Marianne. Yes, colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It really gives me a lot of pleasure to open this important session on escaping the pilot trap, especially since our president now is all about scaling solutions. So this is very much very timely, very relevant. And this is not only about startups or technology, it is about how we secure food, jobs, and resilience in a rapidly changing world. As you all know, the agri-food sector is undergoing profound transformation. Urbanization, rising incomes, and rapid technological change are reshaping how our food is produced and financed and delivered. AgTech, from digital platforms and precision farming tools to logistics and finance, offer enormous potential to boost productivity, improve food security, and create quality jobs, especially for youth and women. But in many emerging markets, scale remains the exception rather than the rule. In Africa, for example, just over 7% of AgTech companies have raised more than $10 million in investments, and only a handful have crossed the $20 million threshold. The vast majority still remain below $1 million. This reflects, I don't think, a lack of ideas, but the systemic barriers that prevent promising solutions from reaching millions of farmers. At the same time, capital flows are cooling, leaving donors and concessional finance with a more prominent role in shaping this next phase of growth. The challenge is to align this support with business models that can also attract private investment and can scale sustainably. So the barriers are well known. Agriculture is still seen as a high-risk investment. Financing is often concentrated in a few countries, a few value chains, ecosystems remain fragmented, and grant-based support doesn't always prepare startups for commercial investment. So these structural issues persist, and despite years of ecosystem building, and that's why the path to scale is still so narrow. And why does this matter? This matters because AgTech has the potential to be transformative. We all know that. And not just for yields, but for jobs, competitiveness, and resilience in the face of climate change. Unlocking that potential requires better coordination, smarter de-risking, and more actionable intelligence to guide our investments. And here, the World Bank Group is uniquely positioned to tackle these systemic barriers. Through AgriConnect, our new initiative, we are doubling commitments to agri-finance and agribusiness to $9 billion annually from our own account and another $5 billion in private capital mobilization annually by 2030. But more important than the number is the ecosystem approach. AgriConnect moves us beyond fragmented projects to a systems-wide platform, linking finance, data, infrastructure, and policy reforms. So our aim is not just to fund AgTech startups, but really to create the enabling conditions for them to thrive and scale, with smallholder farmers and producer organizations at the center, as was also mentioned in Ajay Banga's remarks at the annual meetings event that we organized last October. Our comparative advantage lies not just in financing, but in convening partners such as yourselves, aligning public and private investments, and strengthening the policy and regulatory environment so that AgTech can move from pilots to national and regional solutions. So today's discussion is about exactly that. How can we work together, governments, investors, development partners, and innovators, to build the conditions for AgTech to achieve impact at scale? With that, let me turn to Parmesh Shah, our global lead for data and digital agriculture, who has been at the forefront of this work, to share his perspectives on how the World Bank Group is engaging with AgTechs and supporting ecosystems on the ground. I look forward to a very productive discussion. I'm sorry I won't be able to stay till the very end, but I'll stay for as long as I can, at least for the first hour. Thanks, and over to you, Parmesh.
Shobha, and thanks for your time and leadership on this agenda and setting the context well. So when I was talking to Mary Agnes, we thought we'll set the context of how we went on this journey about 6 years back, and why we have now persisted, and we feel that we are at an inflection point where we need to create a facility which allows us to do this on scale. And as Shobha says that pilots have been going on for a long time, but I think the World Bank should not be in the business of pilots. World Bank should be in the business of scale. And just to say that, I think we have in the past invested in projects and not ecosystems and platforms. And I think our strategy has changed, that we should always work at the ecosystem level and platform level and make systemic investments there, which can then drive scale there. So just to give you a feedback, that in 2019, with our partner Korea World Bank Partnership Facility, we invested in Kenya. We did a major risk diagnostic, and we found that there were 176 scalable startups in Africa. You know, that's not only just Kenya. Overall, we found that 176 had the highest potential. And then we invested in ecosystem building. We ran an innovation challenge, and we had a number of people applying for it. We ran short of place. There was huge demand. And then we realized that there is a need for ecosystem building, and there's a need for systemic investment. And at that scale itself, we announced a launch of a 1 million farmer platform. We thought that if we don't announce a 1 million farmer platform, we'll have another pilot which will just evaporate in no time. And I think that was the right kind of thing. And we have now 1.4 million farmers being covered on our work with about 34 startups in Kenya. So I think it is critical that we invest in ecosystem, which leads to other kinds of things. So scaling AgTech requires knowledge, data, and eventually an incubation, acceleration, ecosystem, and then financing. So I think it requires many things, but if we start with financing and we don't do the building blocks, then also the things are not sustainable. Generally, the problem is that the pipeline starts, but it evaporates because people consider investing in this risky. So we need to create a public good, which is in form of data and other things about these investable propositions, and then also build tools and analytics which will be used by people who want to finance this sector. So clearly, knowledge, data, very important. And I think today you will hear about this operational dashboard which has been developed on AgTech ecosystem, which could be used by both the governments and our own operational teams, because we feel that each bank operational team could invest in creating the ecosystem if they had the data and information readily available. So if they have to search for it, then we don't see those investments coming. So knowledge, data, very, very important. The second thing is the partnership part. I don't think the bank can do it alone. And I think that's why we decided to work with WFP's Innovation Accelerator about 2 years back. And I'm glad Hela and others are here from WFP, and I think it's important to build partnerships with agencies like WFP and other innovation accelerators so that we could build it in a co-produced kind of way and do it in a way that. So I think that is also very, very important. The third is the convening power. I think we have started playing that role. And I think once we have the Global AgTech Innovation Facility, I think with our own partners like IFC, so I'm glad Santosh is here, who is also trying to build this kind of a ecosystem within IFC to consider this sector as less risky than it's been considered in the past. So if we create a facility with data and all, maybe we will also equip IFC with more tools to help create a case for more investment in IFC as well. So, and I think this webinar is a very good opportunity for us. And I think we have developed these partnerships with AgBase, which is developed by Britta Bridges. I'm glad David is there with support from the Gates Foundation is also supporting. WFP Innovation Accelerator, Hela is there. And then also collaboration with CGIAR. I'm good to see Nathnal also there today joining this conversation from CGIAR, but Santosh from IFC. So I think we will try to work on this Global AgTech Innovation Facility as we go ahead and feel that if we can come out with an institutional platform which scales us up, we believe that this would be quite an important initiative as we go forward. And many thanks for joining today. I think we have 162 participants now. The interest is quite good. And I think the interest is growing, and we will also create a community of practice with which whom we will work on the innovation side in a very big way. Thank you very much, Shobha, and over to you, and I look forward to the proceedings.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Parmesh. Really great to see the progress, since that the innovation challenge that we had back 6 years ago in Kenya, which has really now seen some impressive achievements in the last 6 years. But let me now hand over to Maria Agnes, who has worked with Parmesh on this agenda for many years now, and who will moderate this webinar, which will be showcasing the work that has been done by our team. Very glad to see Santosh from IFC. This is a World Bank Group effort. And Maria Agnes will take over from here to showcase the work done by the team, along with all of our key partners. Very glad to have Hela, Gates, CGIAR, and others on this very important webinar. Thanks, and over to you, Maria Agnes.
Thanks, Shobha. Okay, so let me go through a little bit what we are going to talk to you about today, as we have a lot of people there, so you have a bit of visibility. So the first part, there's 3 parts to this webinar. The first part is an opportunity to share our journey, as Parmesh explained, but a little bit more in detail. Identifying and piloting tools. It will showcase how we can use data, knowledge, and partnerships as a service for supporting World Bank client countries in the design and implementation of programs, leveraging AgTechs and supporting entrepreneurship ecosystems at scale. And this will be illustrated in the case of Morocco. The second part will focus on how we have piloted these approaches in Kenya with the piloting of an ecosystem convening approach with a Kenya Public Partnership AgTech Facility and a targeted acceleration program. And for the third part, we will welcome 2 discussants, so IFC and CGIAR. Now, to start with the first part, I would like to welcome David Saunders, Director of Strategy and Growth at Brighter and the Program Lead for AgBase, Brighter's platform for tracking and analyzing AgTech and climate tech investment trends across Africa and other emerging markets, and with whom we've now had the opportunity to work for the past couple of years for supporting this agenda at the World Bank. So David is going to tell us more about some of the complexities of the ecosystem and how we can leverage data and knowledge to develop a dedicated operational tool to help identify program designs and partnership opportunities for implementation and convenings for ecosystem alignment. So David, over to you.
Thanks so much, Maria Agnes. And I think afternoon, evening, morning, everybody. It's great to have such a good turnout. And it's also coming at a good time for us as well, as we at AgBase and Brighter, which is a company that basically maps innovation ecosystems across emerging markets and has been focusing on the AgTech and climate tech sector with the World Bank, the IFC, Gates Foundation, FCDO, and others, has also just completed some of our mapping in South and Southeast Asia. So part of what we're looking to share today is a little bit of insight into what Shobha was speaking about earlier, which is the challenges of scaling AgTechs and the challenges of scaling AgTechs in different contexts. The second thing is then relating to what Parmesh was speaking about, which is what are some of the tools that we can help develop with the World Bank and other partners that can help respond to this different problem that we're encountering. And as Mary Agnes was saying, as Parmesh was saying, and Shobha was saying, we've been working in partnership with the ISF and the WFP and CGIAR and others in looking at how we can build different tools and approaches to this. So I'm going to start with giving you guys a little bit of data, which just shows you some of the context of the problem that we're looking at, how markets differ in terms of coming up with approaches to responding to this, but what are some of the kind of common approaches and common recipes that we're seeing? And then I'm actually going to hand over to Elisa after this from the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, who's going to share a little bit more about one of the areas that I won't go into as much detail on, which is the venture support under this initiative that Mary Agnes, Shobha, and Parmesh have been running. So the first thing, and I was very happy to hear Shobha echoing this, was just how hard it is to scale AgTechs. So, in terms of looking at the data that we have in our Brighter Intelligence and AgBase platform, just echoing what Shobha was saying, only a very small percentage of these AgTechs are really able to scale. And while ticket size and funding is no perfect indicator of scale, it can be a pretty good proxy for us to see, how many AgTechs are at least attracting the funding usually associated with being able to deliver a certain type of scale in the market. And very, very few of these AgTechs, particularly in Africa, but as the work we're seeing in Southeast Asia and Asia is also showing, are able to really get to this stage. And I think what's most interesting is that this is not a phenomenon just of Africa, where a lot of Brighter and AgBase's work has been, but this is a phenomenon of across emerging markets. And I think one of the things that we've particularly seen over the last few years is after an AgTech funding boom in terms of, activity from the 2020 to 2022, we've seen that there's been a slowdown in funding, largely into startups in general, but in AgTechs as well, across emerging markets, which shows that this pathway to scale is narrowing. And I think what you've already seen, in 2025 in a number of markets as well, funders, and particularly the private market, might be coming back to sectors like fintech, for example, in Africa and other places. We're not seeing that coming back to the AgTech space. What we're rather seeing is an increase in the role that concessional funders are playing, as Shobha was speaking. So the dynamics that we're seeing are quite different. And I think what's really interesting about how these dynamics play out is that you have different, ingredients in markets in terms of what you actually need to scale. So if you look at, comparing Southeast Asia and Africa, as we've done here, the type of solutions that have emerged over the last 5 years are not all the same. So these categories we have here, and I've tried to kind of keep it use the colors to try to keep the story a little bit simple. But effectively, the solutions in green are really those on-farm solutions that are often targeting smallholder farmers, which has really dominated the landscape that we've seen in Africa. The yellow ones that we see here are more of the climate solutions that we're seeing emerging, and that's been pretty consistent across both regions. And then the gray and blue have a lot more to do with the off-farm solutions, which we've seen much more present in Southeast Asia than Africa. And if we look at the products that we see in Africa versus Southeast Asia as well, we also see a difference in the type of solutions that are anchoring these ecosystems and those that are being built, right? So, following that thread from before, if you look at the data in Africa, we see a lot more on-farm solutions targeting smallholder farmers with financing, helping to improve agricultural activities, fertilizer and inputs. And this big category here called other really just shows that in Africa, there's been less concentration of funding into a few proven products, but a lot more kind of experimentation, which I think comes to this point that we're speaking about now in terms of pilots and how we help scale those. And then where we have seen scale, a lot of that has come from concessional funders, particularly looking at, the smallholder farmers on the continent. When we look at Southeast Asia, we've seen actually more concentration in terms of products that really speak to the value chains in the region that have played a role in helping to aggregate up small producers, connecting them both into domestic premium value chains, but also into export value chains. And why this is important, obviously, is because when you're developing venture building support, when you're developing investment strategies or funding strategies, you need to make sure that they're fit for the solutions and the markets and context in which they're operating within. You also see that the type of funders that anchor the ecosystems are also different, right? So if you compare Africa versus Southeast Asia, a large part of the ecosystem dynamics in Africa and the AgTech sector has been supported by DFIs and impact investors. And a lot of the impact investors that we see are also supported by donors or DFIs as well. And that shaped a lot of the direction. And I think what's interesting there, as we've seen before, it's built a maybe thinner investable landscape, but a more resilient landscape as well, and one that's more impact orientated in terms of the type of beneficiaries from the solutions. Whereas if you look on Southeast Asia, you see a lot more VC, a lot more corporate activity as well. And that's also helped shape the dynamics around strategic value chains, as we've seen before. But we have increasingly been seeing more DFIs and impact investors emerging in that market. And even if you look within Africa, you do see variations as well in terms of the type of solutions emerging. So interestingly, North Africa looks more like South and Southeast Asia in particular, where you see a lot more export value chains in markets like Morocco that Numello will get into a little bit later. West Africa, you've actually seen a lot more funding into logistics and transports, where fragmented infrastructure has been a major challenge that's being addressed. Whereas in Southern Africa, for example, particularly anchored in South Africa and the university ecosystems that you have emerging there, you've seen a lot more ag biotech. So while the variations are maybe not as clear as we'd always like, you're definitely seeing variations in terms of the type of solutions emerging and those that are really getting traction and scale. And understanding that's what's often driving that, as Parmesh was saying earlier, is the underlying infrastructure and environment. One of the things that we have been seeing, though, in terms of common thread, and really what we're seeing as a really big drive for this facility and the work that we're doing, is that with this correction that we've seen, particularly in private capital markets, over the last 3 to 4 years, with a little bit of recovery recently, is that DFIs have really been increasing their presence, particularly in the climate and AgTech space. While this has been a common phenomenon that we've seen, or something we've seen in Africa for quite some time, this is also something we're increasingly seeing emerging in Southeast Asia as well. And if we look at, the launching of just some of the funds that have announced over the last few years, what we've seen is those that are really focusing on AgTech are increasingly being backed by DFIs and donors as well. And a big part of that is looking at how they can shape the direction of the agricultural sector, the same way that we've seen energy and mobility go into a more sustainable climate adaptive or mitigative practices. And in Africa, what we're seeing is more and more presence of DFIs as well, in terms of stepping in and investing in some of these AgTech companies that have been able to, get to the other side of scale and are really starting to be able to leverage this capital to amplify the impact that they're having, either offering new services to farmers or expanding into new markets. And so what we really see is that as kind of DFIs are scaling up their presence, as we're seeing more divergence in terms of AgTech pathways across emerging markets, is that there's really a need for the better tools and resources for decision makers like at the World Bank or at the IFC or investors to be able to respond to these. And there's really been 3 areas that this Global AgTech Innovation Facility that Mary Agnes has been spearheading, and that we've been working with the WFP, CGIAR, IFC, and others in terms of driving. One is really on data and intelligence. And I've given you a little bit of a sense of kind of how that data can be used to contextualize different markets, but I'll show you how we can actually use it to dive deep into specific markets and actually help, decision makers in countries from Madagascar to Peru make decisions. We've also realized that as DFIs are increasing their presence and impact investors across emerging markets, there's actually a need for more convening to both align strategies, share learnings, and also connect better with the private sector to make sure that how we diverge does not increase this gap between where concessional and commercial funders are. And the last bit, which the World Food Program will go into more detail about, is, okay, how do you then translate this into actually tailored support to help more AgTechs get through this scaling barriers? So in terms of data and intelligence, one of the tools that we've been developing with the World Bank is how can we build dashboards and directories leveraging the underlying data from AgBase that has been supported by the FCDO and the Gates Foundation, but contextualizing with that with the data and information the World Bank already has with their Agri Knowledge Hub as well. Bringing that together to help markets individually understand and make sense of what does their AgTech and digital innovation landscape look like? Who are the potential partners that they can be connecting with to deliver this, the work that's needed? And who are the other donors, DFIs, governments, investors that are operating their market that they can more effectively coordinate with? And, there's really 4 use cases that we've seen from this kind of data and intelligence, just building on what I was saying initially, is first, in a lot of cases, it's just sense making. Like, it is a more complex landscape out there, and it's only getting more complex as we see a farther diversity of solutions, funders, and instruments. How do we make sense of that and identify where the gaps and opportunities are? How do we bring together the right people? How do we source and identify the right type of solutions, making them more visible when we're looking to address things from e-voucher schemes to soil health innovations? And lastly, how do we coordinate the right actors together so that they can amplify what they're doing rather than continue to work in silos? We've done this in 4 countries so far with the World Bank, the WFP, and others. Most recently, we've done this in Kenya, focusing on a specific use case or theme of soil health. So there, we did a mapping of the landscape of soil health in Kenya and East Africa, identify gaps and opportunities to help the World Bank in launching their recent challenge competition there around soil health innovation. We helped identify stakeholders through these dashboards, helping to shape the agenda for that competition, as well as host a convening to bring together the innovators as well as funders and other partners. We worked with local partners like the WFP to help source and identify cohorts for that competition. And last but not least, we helped in terms of coordinating follow-on support for those soil health innovators as well. So in that instance, it was very much coordinating around a specific thematic area. But in other instances, the markets might not be at that level, and you need to coordinate more specifically around just the market itself, like in Madagascar, where it's important to take stock of where they're at, who's doing what, and really making benchmarking where the AgTech sector is. There, we were able to bring together different types of stakeholders as well, identify potential partners for digitalization activities, and connect those World Bank partners there with local organizations too. Madagascar is at a very different stage than Kenya. And so a big part of the activity there was more on the digitalization efforts than necessarily the acceleration efforts. And as Nabila will say, we also worked in Morocco with her and her team, helping to landscape and benchmark where Morocco is at. And they have a very unique market in terms of what they're trying to do, where I was saying it looks a bit more like Southeast Asia, where they have very strong export value chains. And there we helped as well in terms of convening and bringing together the right partners with the ministry. And last but not least, this isn't only in Africa that we've done this work. We also did this work in Peru as well, which is what we built one of the dashboards for as well, which actually my colleague on this call, Hong Yul, led that work too. And just to give you a sense of what these look like, I mean, it's, sense making is really saying, okay, helping to contextualize where the market's at. What are the sectors that are attracting the most funding? Where are the funders at? Where are the startups at? For example, in a lot of markets like Madagascar, it may not be that you need to have just an impact through working with complex AgTech solutions. A lot of the case, it might be trying to extend fintech solutions that are already operating into rural areas to help with financing for smallholder farmers. In Kenya, where you have a more mature market, it was about how do we tailor for specific soil health innovators the type of support that they need to break through some of these barriers that prevent them from scaling. And here, working with the WFP and others, we were able to look at what barriers of specific organizations were, what their needs were, and then identify very practical partners that they could then work with in order to help them through this, and then actually make those connections as well. And ultimately, as I was saying, we're trying to bring this together as we're experimenting at these different country levels and feed this information back up to a global community through regular convenings with DFIs, investors, innovators, donors as well. We've actually already run 2 of them with the World Food Program, the IFC. Shobha kindly led one of the events, with the French ministry participated in others. We've had impact investors like INP, AgDevCo, and the purpose of that is, how do we really remove the risk of duplication? How do we really more effectively coordinate? How do we bridge the gap between what donors are doing, DFIs are doing, and impact investors are doing to share lessons, align funding strategies, and ultimately accelerate innovation ecosystems? And we've run 2. The first one was in November 2024. We're really focused on aligning funding strategies, and it became very clear to us that this gap between concessional and commercial capital was widening, and how can we address that gap? But also, where do we not necessarily need to address that gap, and where should we? Most recently, we held one in Paris, the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, where we really focused on how are we looking at building the underlying infrastructure and enabling environment to accelerate innovation ecosystems. And hopefully later this year in December, where Shobha, myself, and some others will be at the World AgriTech event in Dubai, looking at how we can build on these conversations and expand out of the lessons we've learning in Africa to reflect this growing presence that we're seeing of our DFIs outside of it in emerging markets, to see how we can better share lessons in order to figure out what these kind of common recipes are, helping to scale more AgTechs in emerging markets, even though they seem to have different ingredients. So with that, I'll hand back over to Mary Agnes, and then we can go on to Elisa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And yes, now we welcome Elisa Choi, Portfolio Manager within the Scale-Up Enablement team at the World Food Program Innovation Accelerator, and with whom we also have been working for the past couple of years to identify how the World Bank could leverage the capacity the World Food Program has developed to support our investment projects. So she will say a few words about how this technical assistance for ecosystem building can look like in practice. Elisa, over to you.
First, I need to unmute myself. Hey, everyone, I'm Elisa, and I'm with the WFP Innovation Accelerator, where we source and scale high-impact innovations that support WFP's mandate of achieving zero hunger. So you might have heard of WFP. We are the world's largest humanitarian agency, and we work in over 120 countries and territories, where we have deep field presence and knowledge across value chains. And in many of these countries, we often also act as a key market off-taker to procure food that support our operations. So we are very much embedded in local value chains. And in parallel, we also have these global and regional innovation hubs, as you see on the screen here, that help WFP expand its impact and efficiency. Now, we started working with the World Bank a few years ago because we realized that we had very similar goals, which was to scale ag solutions that have the potential to solve some of the biggest food systems challenges that impact the smallholder farmers and the communities that we work with. So we've had many discussions and different brainstorms and workshops throughout the year to really understand how we can bring these two institutions together. And we saw an opportunity to leverage the existing partnerships and initiatives of the World Bank, and many who we're going to hear from today, particularly around data and research and convenings, and marry that with our own technical expertise in designing local innovation programs, our expertise in food systems, and of course, leveraging WFP's global networks and presence. And this is how the facility was born. So we wanted to bring together a consortium of partners to amplify the impact that we can have on food systems, leveraging our respective institutional capabilities, our networks, and our expertise to focus on these kind of three key components to support AgTechs and ultimately transform global food systems. And World Food Program would play a role under these data-driven acceleration services. Now, we eventually want to work with a broad range of partners, but we first wanted to test this with the World Bank investment projects as a use case under this facility. And the approach is relatively straightforward. So first, we're going to leverage data and research to help identify the levels of maturity, key problem statements, the existing solutions in the market, funding trends, et cetera, validate that data with key stakeholders in the ecosystem, and then we would come in to design a customized and tailored program for the World Bank that can support and in that market. we would implement and of course share those learnings through various convenings, again with the broader ecosystem. So to do this, we mapped out the strengths of WFP and where we have extensive experience. And we developed this kind of menu of technical advisory services, as we're calling it, for the facility that can be informed by data and tailored for the design of programs for the World Bank across 3 key areas. So the first is farmer and user level insights. So we really care about the end users of these ag solutions and how relevant these solutions are. So we work with smallholder farmers and value chain actors on the ground. With our initiative, Farm to Market Alliance, for example, we have a reach of over 700,000 farmers across 3 countries in Africa alone. And feedback from our farmer networks can help provide some additional insight on things like challenges to uptake for AgTech, willingness to pay. Sometimes when we introduce new products, especially new tech tools, we often hear feedback on how some of our users prefer existing and free solutions like WhatsApp or Messenger in some countries, or may prefer like low tech solutions like USSD or IVR to some of these newer kind of flashy apps. So we can really leverage our networks to engage the end user to supplement and validate the data that we have. Second is technical support for AgTechs. And what we do really well at WFP Innovation is develop end-to-end innovation programs. And here are just a number of examples. But we also know that one of the key challenges, as we've discussed in some markets, is often the oversaturation of support programs, and often also the mismatch of needs and gaps in these programs as well for the AgTechs. We also, so we can really leverage data here in this for the technical support to understand some of the challenges and gaps, but also the types of support programs that exist in the market, and also which programs AgTechs have previously participated in. And shout out to AgBase, which is a great source of this data, and validate that with our AgTech network so that we can avoid duplication and ensure that the curriculum that we're designing for the World Bank or other partners is super tailored and relevant to our cohorts. And lastly, ecosystem enabling services. A lot of the challenges that we've identified through research and data and our own experiences, and Shobha mentioned a few as well, is around the lack of coordination amongst ESOs and a lot of the fragmentation in ecosystems as well. So here we can provide capacity building to support actors in the ecosystem to ensure that it's more coordinated and streamlined and strengthened on how it supports AgTechs. Now, very rapidly, because I don't have a lot of time, these are just a few examples, but just wanted to zoom into a few key technical support programs that we offer that can be leveraged for the facility for the World Bank investment projects across different levels of business maturity. So we've supported AgTechs around the world from ideation to scale along their journeys. And we've done this mainly through 4 key programming options that have been proven to work really well when tailored and in partnership with private sector and public sector as well. So the first is R&D labs. This is our research to commercialization model, which has worked really well with our Ignite Hub in East Africa, where we partnered with public and private sector, research institutions, and academia to bring 15 research-backed ideas into commercialization. And one good example of this is Ria AgriPad, which was actually one of the runner-ups for the World Bank Soil Health Challenge in Kenya. It's a low-cost soil testing tool built from research to a commercial product in 8 months, and it's 8 times cheaper than what's available in the local market. So we're talking about very localized solutions for local challenges that we can also apply under this facility. Innovation, incubation and acceleration services. So we are a bit more, maybe we're a bit more familiar with these services, but boot camps and sprint programs that we can tailor for early stage companies that are refining their business models, or acceleration programs for more mature companies. And my colleague Andrew will speak a little bit more to how we did this with the World Bank in Kenya later. But here we know how critical it is to also have partnerships with government, data and research partners, private sector and investors to ensure the success of these programs. And just for example, on a local level, through the Ignite Challenge, we've supported 75 local SMEs across sub-Saharan Africa. And through the support that we've provided on our initial seed funding, we've seen 10x the return with follow-on investments from impact investors reaching over $20 million. And lastly, global challenges. We want to support and source and platform a lot of these promising innovations that can address big challenges more at the regional and global level. And at the Accelerator, we have proven models that we can tailor for different challenges, and we're excited to bring this also to the World Bank investment projects. So these are just some ways that the WFP is bringing our expertise and our networks to help advise World Bank investment projects, and how we can partner with others under the facility to really amplify the impact that we can have, leverage the data and our respective local and global expertise and our networks to design more informative and thoughtful programs for AgTechs under the facility. So with that said, look forward to working with many of you in the future, and particularly our World Bank colleagues that are chiming in today. So if you have any thoughts or feedback, please feel free to reach out, and look forward to the rest of the webinar. Thanks.
Thanks, Elisa. Now to finalize this first part, I would like to welcome Nabila Gouroum, Senior Agriculture Specialist at the bank, who is here today to share the experience of the World Bank in Morocco and how the team leveraged data, knowledge, partnerships, and convenings to support the government with the development of the AgTech ecosystem in the country. Nabila, over to you.
Hi, Marie-Agnès. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know if you see my presentation on the screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes, so today we will explore how to scale AgTech impact in emerging markets like Morocco. Doesn't work. I don't know why. Sorry. The presentation doesn't. Oh. Okay, so Morocco is at the forefront of climate change challenges, but its agri-food sector is also a source of rapid innovation. Despite promising new technology, AgTech companies often struggle to scale up due to slow adoption, fragmented support, or limited data for decision making. Success for us means building a coordinated ecosystem, validate solution on the field, and using data to drive policy and investments. With this vision in mind, let's see how the World Bank is supporting Morocco agri-digital transformation. The World Bank support is in line with the Morocco Green Generation Strategy, which by 2030 aims for digital services for 2 million farmers, climate risk insurance to cover 2.5 million hectares, and the conversion of 1 million hectares to CSR practices. A key part of this strategy is the creation of digital agriculture hub, Pôle Digital Agricole, which will drive innovation, data management, and institutional change. Our approach includes diagnostic assessment, the analysis of need, and leverage data, knowledge, and building public and private partnership. Our work is organized around the 4 pillars that lay the foundation for effective digital transformation in agriculture. David has just highlighted the importance of diagnostic assessments and the ecosystem analysis, and Brighter help us to carry out this first analysis in Morocco and do some benchmark of the best practices. We also conduct interviews to engage with the stakeholders. This help us understand the ecosystem strength and gaps. Under the pillar 2, we work to leverage data and knowledge by building capacity, supporting the Pôle Digital, developing data-driven strategy, incubate startup like what just Elisa just mentioned, the importance of the incubation of the startup and the leverage of data and knowledge to fund the solution and to match the supply with the demand. With this solid foundation, we are moving to prioritize use cases, identifying solutions that address real farmer need, and design demonstration farm to test and showcase this innovation. Partnership also are essential. So we collaborate, for example, with the French Digital Farm Network to develop and support the same initiative in Morocco. We organize strategic workshop and facilitate networking through events like Agri-IT Days, where private sector meets with the public sector and where we have all the stakeholders in the digital ecosystem, startup, donors, etc. We support also the participation in international agriculture fair in Morocco and in France. These efforts strengthen the ecosystem and connect Moroccan AgTech to global opportunity. Here are some concrete examples of digital agriculture solution developed with the World Bank support. So we have a lot of platforms, for example, advisory platform like Ardna and TGMS for forecasting, supply chain tools like ASAR that offer market data, precision agriculture and smart irrigation to improve the farm management, digital index insurance that helps manage climate risk. We also support Zar'i Direct, which is a platform to support monitoring and evaluation of climate smart agriculture. We support also Research Institute to develop a digital mapping and MRV to enable climate smart planning and progress tracking. The impact of all this work, we can say that our support is helping build Morocco agri-tech innovation ecosystem, but there is still a long way to go. So we have conducted diagnostic assessments, supported startups, developed digital platforms for crop forecasting or climate adaptation, and promote institutional innovation and public and private partnership. Looking ahead, we expect enhanced coordination, validated solution, better data for policy, and a strong digital pole. Our goal is to move beyond pilots to systematic, scalable impact for a resilient and sustainable agriculture sector. So with these big thank you for inviting me to present you our program in Morocco. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nabila. Really interesting program. So I know Shoba has to leave. I don't know if you have a couple of seconds to say some words. Otherwise, no worries at all. And thank you so much for joining this first part. Shoba?
No, I was just typing up a message, but I might as well say it now. No, this has been really interesting to hear from Brighter about, especially the differences between Africa and Southeast Asia. I was also texting Parmesh separately. I think this could be very interesting for taking our AgriConnect initiative forward, and I'm going to be discussing this further with Parmesh and the rest of the team on how we could build on what has been done, especially, and what I like especially is we have a number of different examples. Morocco is great, and we also have Kenya, of course, which follows. So this could be a truly global facility, assuming we can get the funding to set this up. And I hope I will be able to convince senior management about this. So stay tuned. Sorry that I can't stay for the rest of the discussion, but what I've heard is really exciting. And I think this is the way we need to move forward to escaping the pilot trap, so to speak. So thank you for the opportunity, Maria-Agnes and Parmesh. And I look forward to keeping this conversation going and to see how best we can support it from the World Bank Group, especially now that we have the umbrella of AgriConnect. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much, Shoba, for great kind words, and looking forward to seeing how we can move that forward. So moving on to the second part of the webinar focused on Kenya, I would like to welcome Hengil Song, Data and Intelligence Lead, also at Brighter, and who has been supporting our project of pilot of a Kenya PPP AgTech facility, funded also by Korea, the Korea World Bank Partnership Facility. Hangil supported the knowledge development part of this project and will tell us more about how our learnings about the needs of the ecosystem and the relevance of such ecosystem approach. So Hangil, over to you.
Thanks, Mary Agnes, and thanks team for having us here. I'll share my screen on my side. Oops, sorry. Okay. As Mary Agnes was mentioning, just double checking, people can see the screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I know I have a bit of a short time to discuss. Really the point of us actually talking about this Kenya AgTech facility is that we've been building this AgTech facility pilot with this concept in mind, which is how can data-driven approach to ecosystem building really help bring this type of initiatives beyond just pilot building, but also create it into that next stage of expansion. And we thought that data is a really great approach to really start this whole process with, because as everyone else in this webinar so far, but also some of the comments have mentioned, there are a lot of information and efforts and initiatives out there. Really the key point about this AgTech facility is to be able to centralize those information within a pilot country so that people can also really tangibly see the value of having the centralized information and insights platform through the facility. So I'm just going to quickly walk us through how we've been designing this from the beginning of the conceptual stage to where we're getting ready to implement, and some of the key points that we've implemented in design so that we can think about the sustainability a bit more later down the road. So you might ask, what is this AgTech facility that you speak of? So as described in this webinar description, really this AgTech facility is this concept of connecting the public and private partners in the AgTech innovation ecosystem that identifies the activities and how AgTechs actually plug into the broader agriculture ecosystem. And the core element is really about sharing the information around what's available, what's already been happening, but also what is the information that this ecosystem needs to become more efficient. So there are key components to this facility that we're developing. One is insights and data generation. The other side is convening around those insights. And the third part is facilitating partnership that can really bring these key insights into the facility. And as Mary Agnes mentioned, this is a joint partnership across many of the organizations, including the support of the Korean World Bank Partnership Fund, Brighter, AgBase, ISF, and our Korean partners, our knowledge partner at the Hanyang University's Institute of East Europe and Africa Studies as well. Just to give people a quick insight about how we've been building this process, it's been a almost, I would say, 9-month process of really building a pilot sustainability design and getting ready to implement. The first part was really the market assessment that we've done around Kenyan AgTech ecosystem, as well as then bringing that to a roundtable summit, getting a validation process with the Kenyan ecosystem. Simultaneously, we'll also held a soil health summit, bringing out soil health companies and AgTechs around in the Kenyan ecosystem and also broader East African ecosystem to really help us see, can this type of pilot also have a use case when it comes to thematic focus? We've then also developed case studies across many different countries, including from Korea, and then also then brought that all together to a validation workshop across who we think are the main beneficiaries through the facility, as well as partners through the facility. Through that, we've been able to develop some of the value propositions as well as the needs assessment and partners. And now where we are at is that we've developed the pilot sustainability as well as the pilot activity design, and we're getting ready to actually recruit an implementation partner of this facility. We'll go through this Kenya facility, and then we'll then develop these post-pilot scaling planning around. So this is now where we're at. Just to then quickly walk people through the market assessment that we've done, really identified what does the Kenyan AgTech ecosystem look like? What are some of the emerging patterns, as well as what are some of the missing key gap areas? Without going into too much details about it at this webinar, and happy to circulate some of these information through the organizers of the webinar, we've identified that Kenya was chosen as a pilot for this because it really contributes to almost the majority of the AgTech and AgTech related support and investments that go into the ecosystem happens in Kenya. There are some of the more noticeable top funded companies around the AgTech ecosystem. Value chains are a little bit more defined. There is a diversity of products that are coming out, as well as the ecosystem supports that are coming out of it. And this is why Kenyan AgTech ecosystem was chosen as one of the pilot countries to start this facility with. And then some of the emerging patterns or key insights from the Kenyan AgTech ecosystem told us that this is actually a great place to test out this facility design, as there are these growth of accelerator and support ecosystems that are happening. There's very high rate of early stage uptakes of both different types of products, but also funding coming into the early stage. However, there is a bit of a question around whether this high early stage uptake is leading into the next scaling phase. And we've also then identified that one of the reasons might be that there are a lot of the non-dilutive funding as well as donor-led initiatives that are coming into this ecosystem, but the impact or the scaling potential by coordination and cooperation has not been really tested or seen yet. And this is where the facility really wants to go in as. And also there seems to be some larger funding patterns coming in, meaning that there is private sector involvement or interest into this space, but it needs to be a better connection between these early stage as well as some of the later stage funding that could be brought in or mobilized further. And for these different pattern reasons, we've decided to go with Kenya as the pilot country around this. And then we've also then validated this with many of the actors within the ecosystem. And I'm going to actually just not go too much detail about any of these, but through these various market studies, as well as the validation, we've then developed the value proposition, as well as the theory change for the facility pilot in itself, really with the outcome being that this facility is meant to really bring people together around data and insights and not double create anything, but actually build upon what's happening already. So to really summarize how data then really plays a big impact around these facility design is I'm going to really discuss what are the key ecosystem gaps that we have identified in this facility design and how we're aiming to achieve, at least hoping to solve parts of those ecosystem gaps through a data-driven approach. So one is the lack of clarity and government donor resources for AgTechs. So through this facility design, we're consolidating government and donor activities into an insights and a database, a proto database. The number two part is the repeat accelerator efforts, meaning that there are a lot of accelerators supporting AgTechs, but there is a lack of clarity on how many startups have been actually funded through, who has supported whom, are there repeat acceleration efforts. So again, this facility pilot is designing a historical accelerator and incubator data built for sharing across ESO, so that ESOs and accelerators and incubators can also assess the efficiency as well as the repeat rate of how many or what kind of AgTechs are being accelerated through their programs. Third part is the lack of market data needed for due diligence, and this goes for both AgTechs for more efficient product design or market approach, but also due diligence for investors as well. So this is also an effort to bring out some consolidated market database and briefing documents for the ecosystem to get a better understanding around AgTech ecosystem. Fourth, there are limited pathways to connecting public policy and AgTechs. And what this means is that there are, so far what we're seeing is that AgTechs and public policy or public support work quite in parallel. What we want to do through this facility is actually create a touch point. One way that we want to do this is by also consolidating and creating a prototype of a county level AgTech activity data. That way county level governments or policy makers can also understand where AgTechs can actually plug into their broader direction and design. And then lastly, limited science to business pathways. What this means is that through the data perspective, there needs to be data and intelligence perspective. There needs to be a sharing and a very intentional sharing between the intelligence that is created from the science or the research world, that being plugged into AgTech entrepreneurs. So these are some of the key data and insight-driven ways that this facility is trying to address some of these challenges. We've tested this out by creating market dashboards, call for applications, AgTech support directory, convenings and event tracking. And we're also developing this pilot through thematic focus, which is soil health AgTechs. Soil health has been identified as one of the high challenge, but also hence high impact area. There is a great deal of public interest. There are also very interesting scaling pathways, including carbon credit pathways, innovative bonds, by asset financing, and also there is a high need to actually connect these companies to distribution and market linkages. And we've identified a cohort of soil health AgTechs that we're going to be working with throughout this pilot process. And another reason why we're doing it as a thematic focus is that we have learned throughout this market assessment process that by going too broad around AgTechs, we're actually not able to convene actors as efficiently as data around AgTech can really vary so greatly. So we're focusing quite significantly around the data and the convening needs around a very particular thematic area that has high potential, but also high support potential to be able to build a pilot that can test the use cases of these kind of databases. Just to then summarize, there will be different events, different convenings and insight generation that we'll do to connect the public and private sectors together, including consolidation of the databases and information that we've mentioned, but also by connecting scientists and researchers around soil health events, by trying to create peer-to-peer learning across soil health companies through, again, around insights around the soil health databases, as well as consolidation of increase to market information for AgTechs and ESOs and investors. Just as parting words, some of the key goals that have sustainability in design around this these PPP facility is one, it's really about building data and insights prototypes through the pilot and creating identifying who really will be the holders and the maintainers and the disseminators of these data and insight. This, I think, is a quite important step in designing of the facility so that the data that gets created through the pilot doesn't just, again, become a pilot data, but there is a sustainability in design around this one. And the third, I think, is a very important part, which is building trust and incentives for the partners in becoming knowledge partners so that they can also share the data. They understand that this is a public good that can actually benefit the ecosystem overall. And then fourth, designing convenings and knowledge insights around the data and insights rather than just creating another convening. And speaking of convenings, not to create additional convenings, but to plug in knowledge and insights into existing convenings that partners in the ecosystem are already holding. And last is, now, as I mentioned in the beginning, we're now onboarding local partners and implementers. It's really about having a local presence as well as choosing someone with business sustainability capabilities in running these pilots that we're considering in so that we can build in the sustainability into the pilot phase. With that being said, I'll wrap up here. Please let me know if there are questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer throughout the webinar. Thanks again for having us.
Thank you, Hangil. So for the last presentation of this webinar, and before we welcome our discussants, I would like to welcome Andrea Bogor, Senior Innovation Manager at the World Food Programme Kenya. We have been working with Andrea for about a year now, developing a pilot for testing our technical assistance partnership and focusing on developing a not so usual acceleration program, which focuses on activities that we identified as appearing to be missing in the support ecosystem already present in Kenya. Andrea, over to you. I don't think we can hear you, Andrea, unfortunately, unless it's me, but you're unmuted, so it might be your microphone. Still not hearing you, I'm sorry.
She's unmuted though.
She's unmuted, but so I think it's not the right entry. We couldn't test before. Apologies, everyone, for a slight delay. Let's give Andrea just a few more seconds to change the micro entry. Do you have multiple? Yeah, there you go. Or no, we still can't hear you. what I suggest, Andrea, is that because we're already late, maybe you can test your microphone on the side, and then I would like to welcome the discussants who I'm sure know anyways about the kind of activities that you're doing. So for this last part of the webinar, we are welcoming our key partners as the World Bank. So as Shobha mentioned, the IFC, but also the CGIAR. So I wanted to first welcome Santosh Vasudevan, Global Sector Lead for AgTech at the IFC. We're very happy to have Santosh with us today, as over the past year, Santosh has led a renewed effort of the IFC to scale up AgTech to meet the challenge set up by our World Bank president to double our investment in agribusiness. So not a little bit of an increase. And he's behind the development of an active pipeline for the space with a view to invest at least $200 million across the AgTech ecosystem. So Santosh, over to you.
Thank you, Mary Agnes. Thank you for having me on this webinar. Let me start out by saying building any venture is difficult. Building a venture in the AgTech space is probably even more so given the challenges that everybody here has alluded to. The adoptability, regulation, lack of data, and the lack of coordination amongst many others. But the challenge to all of this, I think the way we are trying to look at it, IFC, is trying to say the farmer is at the center of all of this that we want to do to improve our food security, to improve productivity, and to improve the supply chain reduction in food wastage and improve our climate impact. So a lot of what we need to build has to come from there. So with that in mind, what we have now developed is trying to say, what can we do as IFC? We do not have boots on the ground to say we can come and do interesting things. So when I hear some of the presentations, it's wonderful to hear about a lot of the work that has been done around the digital public, a DPI that is being set up. But I also ask, how does the farmer actually benefit in actionable intelligence? Right. So for us, the challenge is finding the next company that is now going to look at all of these things. So it is somewhere at the intersection of ag inputs, the production, the processing, the distribution, which includes, among other things, a big need for smallholder farmers and many others, most of them who are the big part of the ecosystem, to adopt new technology, but then be backed up by insurance to say, if you fail, we are going to be covering some part of the losses, to make sure that there is storage, to make sure there is logistics, to make sure that there is financing, because working capital is what kills. And I think I heard the last two presenters talk about, how much percentage of these companies kind of go up and raise a follow-on round. So when I look at all of what we're trying to do at the World Bank Group, and we're looking at a greater coordination of saying, how can we work along it? So when we want to invest 200 million, picking on what all of you are saying, I would say we want to invest it in several buckets. We want to invest a good portion of it in really early stage companies. I don't mean seed companies directly. I mean that we want to invest at the seed stage through incubators, through accelerators, maybe 2 or 3 per region. So when we do that, we get our boots on the ground through smart ecosystem builders, through smart venture builders who are working with these companies to give us a line of sight on potential for a future investment. We also have to bear in mind, while all of the venture exits we hear in the SaaS and retail and tech is wonderful, Uber, but we are not in that ecosystem. We are in an ecosystem that's fragmented. The total addressable markets are regional for the most part. And the happy ending that we are looking for in terms of a return on our investment, maybe not an IPO, maybe not an unicorn status, maybe it is between a Series A to a Series C, at which point a strategic has come in and acquired these companies. So which means we need to get in early. And with that in mind, we are looking at getting in early. We're looking at incubators and accelerators on the ground across the globe where we have a footprint to see how can we do this. So we want to deploy $30 to $40 million across several accelerators, knowing fully well that only 1 or 2 companies will come out of each of these accelerators that are fundable for the next round. But that kind of funnel makes it easy for IFC to say which of these projects are fundable. Coming to your point, I think, when I look at some of the data that is presented, with all of the work that the World Bank is doing with the governments, I think a lot of the challenges with AgTechs face is how do you build, how do you collect the data, and how do you socialize it? And when you look at that, I think we need to figure out a way that the DPI is so perfectly set up. And that's where I think our institution infrastructure building activity needs to come in. Once that is done, I use the word loosely, it's almost a plug and play for innovators to create systems that may or may not work. And that takes away the cost to acquisition, customer acquisition cost, the go-to market, which is what most VC investors are looking at. An equal part of what we want to do is say, we want to invest in late series, Series A, Series B companies, which are raising money, which have already proven what they need to do. But then these companies struggle for working capital. And then they use dilutive capital to substitute working capital, which somehow is a circular argument that never works for the most part. So we're trying to figure out how do we do this. So at IFC, we are trying to figure out if we can get blended finance for equity to support many of the equity positions we take, knowing fully well many of these companies will fail, knowing fully well that we don't want to be measured, or we hope not to be measured by usual VC scales at a 10x return, but I want to start very humbly by saying, can I get return of my capital first? Then can I get a cost of capital first after that? And then can I make a little more money, thereby creating an ecosystem that really, really works? Because many of the startups are forced to scale up before they're ready, long before they're ready. So with our view to kind of invest and backed by blended equity, we hope to kind of invest another 100 and 110 million across, say, 10 companies. So we want to play a part in the ecosystem without controlling it, but enabling it. Then we want to work with AgTech focused funds across the globe. Currently, we have only 2. And as much as we're building this ecosystem in the past 12 months, we now have a viable pipeline of about $80 million. Our total AgTech portfolio, including our exposure to funds, is $90 odd million. And if I were to tell you the return on that, it's not flattering. But this is what is needed from an institution like IFC as we build that ecosystem in a farmer-centric, technology-driven approach. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm open to answer any questions, but I just wanted to tell you what we're doing. We're actively talking to people. Over the past year, I have, alongside with my team, which we have now got a few people in, talked to at least 100 plus AgTechs. And we talked to several of them, knowing many of them are not fundable. And many of these companies should not have received, I think, and I hate to say this, I know Maria Agnes and others are going to come after me. I think a lot of time, companies are distorted by the presence of non-dilutive capital. And they take it for granted this is a license that their business model is going to work. I would rather see that to back an IFC investment as we spur the ecosystem, so that way it comes through the funnel. So it is not that it is, I don't want to say I want to have a non-democratic process, but nevertheless, I hope we kind of fund things that are farmer-centric, and several of these things don't need to be replicated. You can bring it across the ecosystem. There are others doing it across the world. Take Latin America, take South Asia, where there's a lot of innovation. We don't need to build everything at home. We need to figure out what we need to tailor make for our ecosystem. Thank you. And that is the last word I have.
Thanks so much, Santosh. Actually, I think you'll realize that this group probably very much agrees with you, and that's probably one of the issues we want to solve. So you're in a safe space here. So Andrea, over to you. Unfortunately, we're all very late now, but you know, if you have 5 minutes to present something so that we can get some questions, and then have Tina closing. We can.
Great, fantastic. Apologies for talking about tech. All right, so thank you so much. I'm Andrea, representing again World Food Program, but the Kenya country office. So we are the local team. WFP has the biggest in-country innovation team in Kenya, which we are very proud of, and we are piloting this data-driven acceleration service to the World Bank in Kenya. It's a pilot, but it's aiming to help AgTechs scale. We talked a lot about the problem, so I'm not going to go into the details. I'm just going to say we targeted enterprises with this accelerator program who are kind of in this missing middle, 1 to 2 million mark revenue and struggling to raise funds above a certain level, right? Kenya is a very rich ecosystem with a lot of fantastic innovations around, but as we saw from Brighter's presentation, both from Hangul and David, the capital is really concentrated over a few companies. So how can we make sure that the pipeline is bigger and we are not missing opportunities to drive really impact to improve lives? That's what we are in for, in business of impact. So also, how did we source these companies? We looked at the 1 million farmers platform already existing great enterprises. We looked at WFP Innovations Network, and we really looked at who has the potential to both raise funds, raise capital, but also drive impact on the ground. And that's why it's really important to have an in-country implementation team here in Kenya, because in the sourcing process, we did field visits to each and every applicant company to make sure that what they are claiming that they do is true. And we also talk to farmers that they are directly engaging with to make sure that they are doing the right thing and they are really changing lives as they claim to do. So the due diligence process was really important. So if we say there are so many accelerator programs out there, the problem is solved, right? Not really. We learned that there is so many needs out there still that these AgTechs have around getting investment ready, as we have heard that some companies scale before they are ready or get in front of investors before they are ready. So we help them get really ready and then match them with investors and strategic partners that really match their exact needs. So using the very wide network of WFP. There's also some need for operational improvement and governance related issues as well. So what do? We are really focusing on a super customized support, because a lot of accelerators traditionally, or incubation or accelerators programs, how they traditionally work is there is a set curriculum that each of the cohort members goes through, let alone, building a business model, a financial model, building a pitch deck, helping them pitch, and everybody goes through the same program. This is very relevant, mostly for earlier stage companies, and as they grow, what we see is the more customized, the better. So that's what we are doing. We are really giving targeted value addition, and we are facilitating cohort connections between the cohort members to actually collaborate with each other. I will show you examples in a second. And we are leveraging WFP's and the World Bank's super extensive network to get the right support where they exactly need it. So we really apply the whole principle of the facility that Hangul and Elisa was talking about earlier, which is complementing the ecosystem, because there's already so many things out there. But very often, as Hangul mentioned, these ESOs or accelerators work in silos and don't talk to each other. So first step that we are doing now, kicking off the accelerator program, is we are actually mapping all the ESOs that already supported or worked with the cohort companies we have selected. We are reaching out to them and we are sharing data. So to make sure that all the work that we are doing with the companies are building on the work that is already in place. So we selected a diverse cohort, right? Hangul was talking about the soil health cohort, where they are a thematic cohort. We went another way to try another way, where it's a very diverse thematic cohort. We have aggregators who also provide input and farmer training. We have a micro insurance company. We have Gene Plus, which is providing artificial insemination of cows to improve the genetic material of cows. By the way, the Kenyan cows are producing 3 times less milk daily than the cows in the US, and that is partially because of genetic material. Fresh innovative cold chain solution, and really avocado processing. Now, as you can see, we already have in the cohort identified potential collaborations. You know, for example, the microinsurance company can very well work together with the aggregator in the cohort, who also does quite a lot of training for farmers, and, you know, bundling services when they are providing inputs, or when they are providing training on certain agricultural practices. Can they also provide training on awareness on insurance, for example, or using the transportable liquid nitrogen cooling solution that GenePlus has for the genetic material for seeds on the other side of the companies. And these are already at least 10 different potential connections that the companies already identified in one morning, 3 hours, and they are willing to work together, which is also very it's a very welcome trend by the investors that we also see. All right, let me move fast. So where we are, we have selected the cohort. We are kicking off the accelerator program, and we will close in a demo day or a closing event, which is interesting that we are hearing from our cohort members that they may not want a big flashy demo day with everybody in the room, but also want a customized, tailor-made audience. And that's kind of the keyword here. Yeah, how can we match the needs as much as possible and not do replication or unnecessary work. So it really matters, because if we are doing this well, we can really scale those companies who are making a big change in the food systems and really link them with capital that can make them sustainable and grow in a way that benefits really Kenya and create a, again, sustainable food system together. So thank you so much. Back to you, Maria-Agnes.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. So last but not least, I would like to welcome Nick Peterson, who's a behavioral economist and, among many other things, co-leads the CGIAR Food System Accelerator. So we have had the chance to engage quite a lot with Nate for our Kenyan and global work. We have quite a few more ideas in the pipelines, and Nate has a lot to say. So it's going to be so difficult for you, Nate, to stay for 2 minutes, but I'm very happy to welcome you for an intervention. Over to you. And I think, Hila, we can already, I will take the floor to introduce you, but we can already prepare you for the closing, some of the closing remarks. I do believe some of the questions that have been asked in the chat have been really answered already by your interventions. I'll come back to the also before intervening introducing you, Hila. But Nate, over to you now.
So speaking of interventions, I thought perhaps this was one when I was invited to something called Escaping the Pilot Trap as a CGIAR representative, maybe perhaps the most notorious in the AgTech space globally. So I wasn't sure until just now. Yeah, so as people know, right, the CGIAR system has done so many pilots. And we've even piloted whether scientists should be running accelerators, and they had to bring in an economist to help out with that. So I think the reason that we're all here is that these things really stay kind of tiny and fragmented. And, you know, Shobha said that ag can be transformative, but we need to de-risk. And I think one of the main gaps that maybe we've contributed to is that this de-risking takes kind of a systemic level of change that the CG system maybe hasn't done as well in terms of our interactions with the AgTech space. So, you know, we can do well at convenings, right? We can bring lots and lots of people into rooms, but how much do the businesses actually trust that engagement with scientists will de-risk them in a way that's high ROI in terms of the exchange for their time and money? You know, Hangyo, I think, mentioned nicely, maybe she knew I was going to be speaking later, that insights need to be shared. But really, we need help to do it well, right? Science is really slow and theoretical. Firms need like the 80% now. They don't care if we publish papers usually, right? And so we have all this expertise, and maybe it doesn't come into the places it needs to be. We also speak in this language of uncertainty, right? We show statistical models instead of building confidence in entrepreneurs appropriately. And what this does often in this kind of one-off way is creates incentives for companies to try to game our systems, right? They say what they need to say to get the capital they need, and move on to the next. And it's not really their fault, right? We always say, oh, these donor darlings, whatever else, but like all of them are optimizing. We can't keep complaining about this being a broad-based problem if we're the ones setting up their incentives. So that's my 2 cents. The nice thing I think from the scientific perspective is that, you know, lots of DFIs, impact investors, you know, bilaterals like GIZ last week really come to us and say, you know, we would love to have some element of the scientific technical assistance that we know the CG system can bring, but you're so big, there are so many of you, like, how do we engage, right? It seems impossible, right? And if we went to a contracting process, by the time it comes through, our program will be over, right? And they're not wrong, probably. And Pramesh made this point too, that these things need to not be kind of piecemeal, but more systemic. You know, so we all are individually sourcing sometimes the same companies, and kind of losing efficiency and communicating to the startup space that we're not coordinating with each other, right? Like that's the message that comes through. And what we know is that entrepreneurs ultimately just want practical mentorship. They don't want slides, they don't want presentations. They want something that's co-created with us sometimes, where we have built trust with them by proving that we can listen. Again, something scientists are okay at if we specify the questions in advance, but are not always adaptive in doing on the fly. You know, and we've done lots of programs now. I lead a project that's funded by the Gates Foundation called MBA, in which we are directly embedded as like the R&D team for market research with a couple of companies, helping them to scale seed systems. And they're honestly in shock that we'd even suggest that type of arrangement, which, you know, only suggests that we have maybe not done as much as we could have. So anyway, my takeaway from this session is that, you know, the call to action is sort of clear, that we need all these functions, but, you know, there are lots of organizations who could be good candidates as the people to, you know, create the long-term incentives, fund the TA, figure out, you know, how these can be aligned with commercial outcomes later on. And, you know, help us not just work with the first eager firm that walks in the door and says they want science. So anyway, I'm here because I think the World Bank is likely to be the best space to do that convening and to do the matchmaking that we sort of desperately need to be the most impactful scientists we can. 6. Nice. I'm in Nairobi.
Thank you so much. All my apologies, we don't have time for the Q&A, but as I said, I think there's a lot that's been exchanged in the chat. Just to mention a couple of themes. There were a lot about farmers' engagement. I think you've heard that this is actually one of the strategies that the World Food Programme is exploring. This is what both Elisa and Andrea have been talking about. So that's exactly what we need to embed into our programs. Also learned about the role of the World Bank. I think we've just showcased throughout this webinar what we felt the role of the World Bank would be. So hopefully it answered a lot of your questions. Now I want to move to closing from Hila Cohen, who's deputy head at the World Food Programme Innovation Accelerator, and with whose team, as you have seen, we've been working with the past few years, identifying how the World Bank could leverage their capacity. So Hila, over to you for the closing remarks. Apologies for the being late.
No worries. Can you hear me well? Perfect.
Yes,
well, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joined online from around the world. I won't say a lot, but I think first of all, I think we're all here because we're all driven by the same cause, each from our different angles of our organization. But I think we all want to ensure that everyone on the planet has equitable access to nutritious food. And for those who have a greater challenge in achieving that we support them as well. And one of the most key elements in this is to have a stable food system, and innovation can only empower that. And I think also many of us in this room are also probably believing in the importance of human-centered design. So I'll also, and in this case, if we work for farmers, we need to work with them and for them. and we need to really understand their problem from their angle and not from our own realities. And these are some of the things that we preach across the WFP innovation teams. I know this is a lot of other groups here in the room are also preaching that as well. And so if I can just share a message with everyone is keep that in your mind's eye. Are we solving a real problem for the farmer for whom we are trying to address the problem? I do want to say thank you to everyone who's part of this network. We are proud to be part of the Global AgTech Innovation Facility. We hope that it benefits the farmers around the world, the people who will enjoy the food, and the local communities. And again, we also believe that many people emphasize this. There's importance for the global networks, but there's also important for the local action. And that is the key goal of this activity, is to empower that and also to share the learning. So I hope this community will continue to share lessons learned, because there's a lot of great ideas, but the operational experience will be really what will make the difference and the impact that we all strive for. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for everyone involved, and thank you for the World Bank team for inviting me and the team to speak today. Thanks.
Thanks so much. So thanks everyone for staying with us until, even though we've passed the time. For us, it's all about what Shoba said. How do we bring this to the next phase so that we ourselves don't get stuck into this pilot trap, and we actually, bring on as many people as possible in this Global AgTech Innovation Facility project and ideas. And, we continue the great work that I think we have a lot of passionate people who are there in the room today and have a lot of really amazing ideas to share. So looking forward to continuing engaging with you all. And with that, thank you so much and have a good day, night, morning.